Oh,
right?
and anyway, thanks for inviting me. It's like since I announced like shutting down Unilogin, I've had like some super interesting conversations with a lot of people, and it was actually like very it had been a very like productive week for me. So it's been interesting.
That's
That's
awesome
great.
to hear.
Yeah, and first I would like to say, Alex, you're the one. I think it was some. It wasn't like a EdCon, but it was like an offshoot when you first talked about what eventually became Universal Login, and that really resonated with me initially a few years back. I can't remember the talk, but it
Wallet,
was.
there was the Wallet Unconference at
That's
the same
right.
time at EdCon in 2018 in
That's
Toronto.
right. That's right. Exactly right.
I went there on a whim. Like I was there like, oh, I have this idea. I want to talk about people. And then I was sort of like saw that was happening and say, hey, I'm gonna figure out a way to get invited to EdCon. I'm gonna find a way to get it like into that workshop and did a talk. And that really started this whole adventure for me.
Yeah, for me, that was the first time that I ever actually saw someone really figuring out the UI UX, the usability for Ethereum. And that really sparked something in me. And so I just want to say thank you
Oh,
for
thank
that,
you.
because if it wasn't for that, like I probably missed a whole wave of Ethereum and crypto. Actually, that talk was really pivotal for me. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah, yeah. And from that, and what you were talking about, it really made a lot of sense to me. And then after I watched it, I was like, why isn't anyone else doing this? This seems so obvious, right? This is the way forward. This is how we like solve the UI UX problems. And so now, a few years later, we're here. Um, and a lot of things are moving forward with DeFi, but it's not so much a focus on like mainstream usability. And would love to get your take on where the ecosystem is at, uh, what you think about in terms of the UI UX pattern and
Mhm.
usability, and how do we, if what you're doing, was that right, was it wrong in the context of everything that's happened? What are the next steps for the ecosystem?
Mhm.
What are the like things that we can tangibly do here? Or is mainstream adoption not a focus? Or yeah.
So I'm like from as I said, like from this week, I'm getting a lot of like let a thousand flowers bloom mood because you're not the first person to actually have said that exact words to me. Like, oh, that particular talk at EdCon or at WalletCon really like sparked something in me, and I started changing. And I feel a lot of those things ended up happening in a lot of different places. Like the guys from Origin told me that like their whole onboarding flow was inspired by that like and a lot of people have told me, oh, we did a lot of things on that front, on ENS login and a lot of things. And I feel that those ideas will keep on going and they will find a place to be. And like Unilogin failed as a business. Like we weren't able to like raise money on it. We are not able to get traction on it for like multiple factors. And like there are a few things on the original flow that maybe were wrong. But I think the core idea fundamentally is private keys are bad. Like the key pairs is not the way forward, and we need to find a way to have multiple key pairs and having multiple sessions and people having and there's like something like your identity should not be a single key pair. And I think a lot of other people are trying to figure it out at the moment. And I think that will happen, right? That will eventually happen. And like yes, Ethereum right now isn't for mainstream. Ethereum right now, like DeFi is pushing everyone else out of it. You can barely play a game. You cannot do prediction market. The only thing you can do is like do $1,000 transaction minimum, right? Because otherwise it's not worth it using DeFi. But I still believe that we will get there, right? It's like I think, as I said in my post, like one of the bets we made wrong was that the scalability wouldn't be an issue. It became an issue. Like we will eventually solve that, and then we will be able to, oh, okay, we'll be able to go back to the fixing usability, hopefully. And like a lot of people have shared ideas on how that can look like in the future. And I think I'm excited to see them come to fruition.
Excellent. What do you think is the if you had to do it all again, and it rewind to 2018 and travel back, what would you be doing differently?
So it's a very different question. Like if you could travel back to 2018, knowing what you do now, or
Yes.
if you were starting this right now, right? Those are actually very different questions, right? Because in 2018, like it's like there was no DeFi, like Ethereum wasn't a very like gas prices weren't like a big problem. So I would say like if I was starting it now, the first thing I would try to do is try to make it more chain agnostic, right? I think the being the reliance on multiple other elements that are only found in Ethereum mainnet was a problem. For instance, ENS became a problem. And I, I think like the reliance on ENS is not necessarily something that was good. We really wanted to give everyone an ENS because we believe that everyone should have a name, and because like people and I don't think like email and phones are the way, right? Because emails and phones are centralized. But basically the users disagreed with me, right? And most users, when given the choice, are you can create a ENS name or you can just give us an email or phone number, went with phone number and email. And that's why like Fortmatic, and that's why Fortmatic raised millions of dollars and became something else. That's why Portis was acquired by Shapeshift. And I would say all the other like more pragmatic, let's try to do everything on chain, are still struggling to find out where they're going next, right? So ENS, I still like ENS, but ENS presents three problems. First of all, is it's overly reliable on the Ethereum main chain. So now, right now, they are struggling themselves with the same problem. They are having to move to a layer 2, and it's not easy to move ENS to a layer 2. And second, I think I underestimated the privacy concerns of ENS. It was always a thing everyone was talking about back then, but like I honestly think it's a much bigger issue than I thought. Right?
Can you
Someone just
dig
gave me an example.
Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, someone just gave me an example in a conversation I had where they were they like Uniswap. Uh, they were looking at all the Uniswap holders and the biggest liquidity providers, and he was able to figure out, oh, that the biggest Uniswap liquidity provider was someone who held a lot of ENS names, and he started looking into it, and it was mostly porn-related websites ENS names. He looked deeper into it and found, oh, it's Amin. It's Amin from Spain Chain. There are a lot of Spain Chain related things. And so that's how he figured out, like, not only that Amin from Spain Chain was one of the biggest Uniswap liquidity providers, and how much money he had in that account going in and out. And I think that's sort of like a cool hack to find out. But it's a little bit like before Snowden, like everyone was just using the internet, the open internet, and not realizing how much privacy and personal information was leaking out. And I think we are in basically the same thing, where we are just using this thing, not really worrying about our privacy leak, and we're just creating this fertile ground where someone can just abuse and use it. Another good example of that is some also a conversation I had this week was uh, debt tracking, right? So most dApps avoid using Google Analytics because some privacy reasons, because like just avoiding Google. But so there are some companies that are coming in that are offering on-chain data tracking for users, for those apps. It's just saying, here's what we can tell you about your users just from their on chain transactions. And turns out that's even worse than what Google Analytics does, right? Because Google Analytics cannot tell you how much money you have in your bank account. Google Analytics doesn't tell you, oh, this user actually visits a lot of porn websites. Like Google Analytics cannot tell you these are the, like, that's how much money he has, like in the other thing. And 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 again, that's something we always knew was a problem with Ethereum as a whole. But like, I think we underestimated the problem, and by making that everyone has a ENS name and allowing that ENS name to be tied to your identity, and then that identity is tied to everything else you do, I think we might have underestimated the problem.
Do you think that there are other ways to achieve the same UI UX pattern that Universal Login has tried to achieve and avoid the technical implementation details of a smart contract wallet? So, with, all of this, you have this extra complexity potentially that you try to solve. And, we at a bridge, we try to solve it with like create two, so you don't have to like spend any money first if you don't have a contract address. But then we have this issue with like meta transaction relaying and all of that, because a user, if you don't want them to hold or need to worry about keys, which is, I believe, is also something that is the first hurdle. It's just too scary for a normal user, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think you had also explained this like crypto paradox. Don't lose your keys, else you lose all your money. But don't write it too many times somewhere where someone can find it, else they'll steal your money, right? And so that is just that first barrier right there that like will hinder adoption. And so you have like an Argent example of a guardian or some facilitator, and you have this incremental decentralization because the user's not going to put their life savings when they first start Ethereum, right? They may put $5, $10. So if there's some custody, that's fine. But you want the user to be able to not be locked in where they're always have this custodial solution. So a smart contract allows for that guardian to be removed by the user so the user could have self-sovereignty. There's all this like technical complication with Create 2 that try to solve with meta transaction relayers and things like that. But is there other viable approaches to this now? It's 2020 that didn't exist like in 2018, or do you think the pattern still with the smart contract holding the funds is still like the ideal way to do this? And then piggybacking off of that question, would like to understand, and maybe this is similar to this multi-chain approach that you alluded to.
So first of all, like Unilogin also use Create 2 for the same reasons, right? So the idea is, oh, you don't actually need to put money before you create an account, but that also means that you cannot do anything. You cannot like, I cannot log into a second device before I put $5 in my account, which is weird, right? Wait, and we had the problem which, oh, it costs you, like if you put $5, you only have like $2 left because $3 went into creating the account. And now like $1 went into adding a new device. And that was when gas fees were low, right? And then it's confusing for the user on, wait, you are charging me for just logging into a second device? You're charging me $1? No, we are not charging. That's our upfront cost. And then at some point it was $10. And then at some point it was $50. And then it became $100. And then we are like, yeah, this approach is not going to work. So I think there are like really two ways forward, and sort of, you can think of them like by looking forward and by looking back, right? By looking forward would be account abstraction in Ethereum. And I think a lot thanks to our efforts, our collective efforts in meta transactions and Universal Login and a bridge and a lot of like those smart contracts smart contract wallet developers, we've been able to take this like account abstraction, which has been always existed. I think one of the first EAP for account abstraction is something like it's one of those two numbers. Like I think it's EIP 87. Like it's very low, and we've it's been brought back, and it's probably something that's going to happen in Ethereum 2 whenever that happens. And the idea is really, okay, now you can make contracts be a first-class citizen. Now anyone can deploy a new contract, and that contract can pay its own gas and things like that. It might solve some of the problems. It might not solve all of the problems, right? Like I think it's important to be a part of that conversation and figure out what that is, because like right now, I think account abstraction is basically just what they call a pay gas opcode, in which it allows the gas to be paid by someone else, the contract of someone else, right? So it's useful, but it might not solve that problem on, okay, what's like there's a cost for doing transactions. So that would be the way forward. And if you do that, I also in a universe where there's sharding and things like that, maybe you can have like maybe all your ENS names are in a different shard, and maybe those are not related to your main crypto keys, not in a public way. Maybe all your DeFi is in a different shard that is sort of unrelated to your main account, and it's hard to it's hard to connect them together. Or like actually, it either needs to be impossible or it's possible, right? It even like, saying something is hard is complicated, because if it's hard but it's doable, then someone will do it and then it becomes possible. So that would be the way forward that we get privacy. There's a second interesting way, and I think Torres is pushing that, and it's a public approach. They call it Tiki, which is not Tiki the Hawaiian thing, but Tiki, and I can send a link for that. And they use something which is actually an old concept in cryptography. Like crypto has this funny thing where we always rediscovering old old math ideas that are like 30, 40 years old. And it's called proactive secret sharing. So in Shamir secret sharing, you have, let's say, 4 keys and you need 3 of them to recover the secret. But at any point, any of those guys can like if any of those 3 keys are found, then you can recover the secret. Proactive secret sharing is a more like a protocol in which you get those keys are back online. They are meant to, they are not meant to be forever offline, but it's rather something that you're supposed to get those 3 keys back online every like periodically, right? Let's say that every 6 months or every year or every day maybe, you're able to get enough of a core online, and those keys regenerate new keys in a way that doesn't necessarily reveal the secret, but they are by being together, they are able to just regenerate shards. And by doing that, they can actually not only regenerate the shards, but change the shard number and change the quorum needed. So what you could do is now we have a crypto primitive in which maybe you start with a 2 out of 3, like one is your device, one is a central trusted provider, one is a recovery backup. You get those 2 out of those, and then you now create, that's how you onboard a third, like a 4th device, a 5th device, right? So it's a way in which it's a cryptographic primitive, right? So it doesn't depend on any particular key. You can do it for Bitcoin, you can do it for Ethereum, you can do it for other Ethereum compatible chains or even like crypto chains. But it's also not perfect. You also, like I think it creates problems for offline devices, and I'm not sure if there's a way to recover in a way that like the old keys that the like you recover 3 of them, like what happens to the other device that was off? Is it kicked off? I don't know, right? But it's an interesting way of exploring in which, oh, maybe we can find a way to forward in which multisig and proactive secret sharing is just a crypto primitive, and we are able to add new shards for your main secret.
Yeah, I think that there's something there. It's almost like a when I think about it, almost like a layer 2 version of like of a multi-sig in a way, right? And I think we're going to need to be able to figure out how to do things off chain as much as possible without necessarily compromising the security features of a blockchain, or maybe defer that so that like the deployment or whatever the upfront cost is not like you don't need to pay at the very beginning, right? So create two kind of moves the upfront cost a little bit, but as you eloquently described, it provides other UI UX issues that you need to understand technically, and it's very difficult to provide that narrative to a disinterested user. Like you said, they're like, I have to pay you a couple dollars. Now it's like a lot of money, but it's cheaper than the first time I did it. Like, why? What's this pricing model? Type of thing. And so I agree with you. And we'll have to figure that out. Yeah. I'm trying to,
Yeah. Or
figure.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just trying to best understand and frame, because, you also, Alex, were one of like the original members of the Meta Cartel. And the, interesting thing about the Meta Cartel was, and it still is, this grant giving facility. One of my kind of my feedback for like Meta Cartel is that there isn't a lot of good signaling back once like a project gets funding, and I think that's not just for Meta Cartel, but I think that it's also pertinent to like Ethereum as a whole. And when there's a project and it ends, oftentimes people don't like to reflect on it because they want to move on to the next thing. My biggest learnings when it comes to like being in Web 2 was, and I don't think this is the greatest name for it, but was like FailCon, right? Where you learn and you can pay it forward to all the other groups by learning. So there's a bunch of learning, and this is what I'm trying to evolve from like Meta Cartel, because I think it's also in this like Web3 world, it's all about shilling. So if you're not shilling something and telling people about the next greatest thing, then you're gonna just get left behind. But I think as builders, and as we evolve the space, we need to learn these lessons, else we're just going to repeat them. And so this is where, I really think that there are just $1 million or $1 billion potholes that could be avoided by having these retrospectives, and being able to talk about them freely in a way that is constructive. And that's what I'm trying to figure out,
And I agree with you, and I think like there's a certain like shame that people think when they fail the project, right? And I think I had that a little bit when we were talking about Unilogin. We were sort of saying like, is there a way in which you can frame the narrative, right? There was a point in which I was trying to reach out to other projects and say, hey, like I was trying to tell them, look, if you can just if you can just find a narrative in which Unilogin is now a part of your project, like you don't even need to like pay me anything. Like just pay my developers for a month, and you get their work. And like I just want to be able to say I like Unilogin was acquired and not really like, oh, failed. And then we decided that wasn't going to happen. We are like, oh, maybe let's not write anything about it. Maybe I'll just post a couple tweets about it on a Friday, and then that. But it ended up, I started like writing those tweets, and then it became like a huge Medium post. And then I published that on a Friday. And then I published like a Twitter thread about that on a Saturday, also on a whim, basically because that's what I was just trying to explain. And it became a super, like it gave me a super great feedback, right? A lot of people really liked the explanations and the long thread. And it even started like, I got, like, it even started like circulating into like other coin areas, and like Calvin Ayer, like from Craig Wise, like commented on it saying, "Oh, you should have come to BSV." I also did that like 2 years ago when I left Mist. I sort of like also made a huge explaining on why Mist like was discontinued, why that failed, and recently I even posted a thread on the audit that revealed a lot of security failures. And that became really popular. A lot of people came to me and say, "Hey, thanks for doing that." Like a lot of people just try to exit very quietly the room, and like I really love that just lessons learned. And maybe and looking back, honestly, there was no shame to it, right? A lot of people were like, "Oh, actually, that the thing you did was very good. It's good that you like it." And like I've been on other position. I've been on also on a position on where I founded a project even before Ethereum, and the project got a little bit of traction, but never really like got off the ground. And then we are stuck with that thing project, I think, for 3 years, like way past when it was even viable, when we were like trying to make it go and trying to save it, and then like we were spending like, and that's a much worse, like that's so much worse feeling than just saying, you know what, it's over. It's not over now, but it's going to be over in 6 months. Let's just stop now because there's no point in which dragging it until it's done, right? And I think I feel so relieved, and just those conversations I've had, and this conversation is a great example of the things I wouldn't have done, I wouldn't have gotten to if I had just decided either to drag it out until the end or just let it die silently without making a fuss about it. And I think you're right. I'm not sure I would go to a failconf to present it, but I do agree with the spirit that talking
Yeah.
about things that get wrong is also important.
Yeah. You know, I 100% agree with you. There should be no shame in this. There isn't any shame, actually. There's always learning, and it's like it's, you know, you sacrifice some time, and what does that sacrifice lead to? Like, how can you leverage it? And as you pay it forward, that's the best thing that you can do. You know, I was in gaming before doing crypto, and indie gaming is so brutal. And so I've and also been on games where it's just a death march. Like everyone on the team knows that it's not going to work, but they just continue going. And it's just, you know, you're going to the slaughterhouse. And that is like the absolute worst feeling ever. Because then you're like, why am I even doing this? Right?
It's sort of
And so
like
that,
you're paying with your soul, right? It feels that you're taking a little bit out of your soul and throwing it away every day. You're still working on that project, and you know it's going to be a failure, but you're trying to recoup something out of it. It's such a
yeah. And so I really appreciate the bravery, the honesty, the intellectual honesty that it takes to say, you know what, we got to stop this and then just move on. And then like, okay, well, from this, what can other people learn from it? Like that's super valuable. And I think, you know, in some industries, other industries, it's a lot more embraced than others. I don't see it being embraced widely within crypto or within Ethereum ecosystem at all. Right. And it's always about like, because then it's like it's always about shilling your next coin, your next project, and all of that. I don't know if it's because of the maturity of the industry or what exactly it is specific to crypto, but this is part of this, like trying to create some space within the ecosystem to talk about this, because people will learn so much more, and it's just so much more approachable, right? Um, and yeah, you know, it's either time or money, and it's easy to get more money, but I don't think it's as easy to get your time back. So this is why, you know, we want to pay it forward with just like learnings, and it saves people so much more time, which will equate to money eventually. And so, yeah, just trying to understand then the lesson, if I can synthesize this moving forward, was like, and I don't know what the solution is here, because you know, I face the same dilemma when it comes to create two, deferring the gas costs, but you're going to have to pay the piper at some point, because you're going to have to deploy that contract on chain, right? So what does that mean from a usability perspective? What can we learn from that? Do we just not use smart contracts then, or do we just launch? And our thought is to just launch on like a side chain, or launch straight into like layer 2, and then you just use layer 1 as like the settlement layer at the end. Try to do as much off chain as possible, because, you know, in the foreseeable future, you know, I don't see gas prices like going down significantly. And, you know, until ETH 2.0 comes out, like, what do? We just wait until, let's just, you know, kind of hang out and wait?
Even if it does go down, right? Like if you go to a game developer, go to just someone outside of the blockchain space and tell them like how much is acceptable as a cost per user, not a cost to acquire a user, the infrastructure cost for your user. Are you willing to pay 1 cent per user and just to onboard a user? And he'll do a calculation and say, wait, you're telling me that if I onboard 10,000 users, I'm gonna have to pay $1,000 just for having that user? Like, why am I paying $1,000 per user, like per $100,000 users, right? I want to have like 1 million users. I want to have 10 million users. I don't want, like, if I onboard 100 million like users, I don't want to have to spend $100 million just on infrastructure costs, right?
That's right. That's right. And so this is why it's like, you know, a chance for us to reflect and try to understand this, because it is this like wider systemic issue. And how do we solve this? And if we don't talk about the experiments that we tried and learn from that, how can new possibilities or new ideas emerge, right? And so this is that space that we're trying to create. So what I learned from this is that, like, maybe, so account abstraction is something that's been tried or been talked about since the beginning. Like you were saying, it was a early double-digit EIP. It's still not, after, let's say, 5 years, still not something that is necessarily mainstream, even in the Ethereum ecosystem. And now we have this context or this backdrop of like DeFi happening and gas prices going up and maybe staying at this new reality when it comes to cost. What does that mean for those that are on the forefront, trying to, developers trying to work on mainstream adoption and usability? Is this something that you think we need to wait for and just hold our breath for ETH 2.0, or is there?
Everyone is sort of moving to layer 2, right? But what happens on like which layer 2? A lot of people are moving to XDAI, which is great, but like if everyone moves to XDAI, how much will it cost to move transactions on XDAI, right? Like the game Dark Forest, right? I played it a while ago on I think Ropsten or Rinkerby testnet. Super fun game. They broke the testnet, right? They used more gas and that, I don't know, like than ever. Like they're moving to XDAI. Is it going to work on XDAI? Like, is it going to break XDAI because of that? And even and what happens if there's like a layer 2 for games, another layer 2 for DeFi, another layer 2 for NFTs, right? And then you suddenly you want to have your NFT on your game. How do you connect those two? Because if the settlement layer costs like $10, then does it mean that to move your NFT from one layer to another layer, is it going to cost like a $20 to two transactions. How does that work? It's complicated, right?
Right.
Right?
You
Why,
have to pay the piper at some point. When do you pay? Right. And then, like, to your point, then yeah, if you have a world of multiple side chains, for example, because you're going to, if you just think that one side chain will win, you're just going to repeat the current issue that we have now. So logic to me says that there are probably multiple side chains, but then with multiple side chains, how do you interop between the side chains? What does that mean? What does that have to do with like composability? Because I think really what you see in like the current DeFi space is a lot of copying and pasting and remixing and adding a little tweak here and there, which is great for experimentation, but you know, it has a net cost on like gas.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, with DeFi, it's possible that that can happen easier because the interesting thing about DeFi is that everything is a token, right? Everything is just like a token. Oh, you want to put money in Compound, you're just trading DAI for CDAI. Oh, you want to put money on Wi-Fi, or you want to buy a token set, you're just buying a token set. Oh, you want to like you want to put add liquidity to Uniswap swap, you're also getting a Uniswap liquidity token. So everything is a token. So in theory, if you have a layer two, that's actually something we consider. Like diversify is like a Starkware's exchange using Stark rollups, whatever, one of those magic things. And then it's a big exchange. And then in theory, if it had all the tokens and if it had enough liquidity, you could just do everything by buying and selling tokens, and then the settlement layer would be a lot cheaper because when you are actually settling it, you're just, what is happening is that you're taking 1,000 transactions that came from DAI to CDAI and then from CDAI to DAI, and then if they equal each other, then you don't need to settle. Like you need to settle with a very small transaction, and that transaction can represent like 1,000, 10,000 transactions that went inside, like in and out, right? So it could happen with tokens, even buying a prediction market. Like if you make a bet on open prediction markets, also a token. So in theory, could you do a lot of things just by buying and selling tokens in the backend? Maybe, right? So maybe for use cases where all you're doing is just doing tokens, maybe you can just, everything is just happening on some sort of like a layer two exchange, and all you're doing is a nice interface that hides the fact that you're just buying and selling tokens.
Yeah, so that I see could solve. So maybe it's by use case, right? And it's not by like, I think of if you were to do, so it's really like batching the transactions by use case. And if there's a token use case, you can batch. And if you're batching and you're just settling, then what you're doing is you're trading the security depending on the implementation of on layer two, from layer one to layer two. So it would depend on the implementation. And also though, what would happen with other types of things that are not necessarily tokens? Like, how could this be applied to, you know, let's say metacartel and like DAOs and voting? Is there something similar, unless you tokenize the vote?
Eventually it's going to be a settlement thing, right? Where like users are going to just live in layer two, and then their transactions will also sort of be aggregated in layer one, but there will be like thousands of transactions in those aggregations. So the user will pay like a lot less for fees when they want to do a special transaction, like moving from one layer to the other layer.
Right,
Hopefully.
right. Yeah, so it's just trying to figure out the pattern. Is there one from like a UI UX then? Let's say, you know, if you were to do this all over again, is there a path to do this where you onboard to layer two and then not necessarily need to onboard to layer one? There are, you know, minus all the security concerns or considerations, the ability to almost like launch into a layer 2 or a side chain for implementation. And then until you accrued, I don't know, like a couple $100 or whatever the case may be, where it's worth settling your first transaction on mainnet. And then like, what are the motivations to do so and why?
Yeah, that's I think that's sort of like the idea. I agree.
I see. That's interesting. Practically, what do you think that implementation could look like? Is it like onboarding into like a specific layer 2, like an Optimism, a Starkware, or, you know, a Matic or a Rollup, or, you know, or is it like going into like a bespoke sidechain, potentially, and then going into a channel, or, you know, a layer 2 from a sidechain? You know, because you want those security guarantees, because if you go straight into a layer 2, depending on that layer 2, you don't have that layer 1 security guarantee, right?
Yeah, you do, right? Like I think yes, you do. Like if I just sell you DAI on XDAI, like you are in control of your own DAI, right? Maybe of course how that can translate to DAI would depend. Of course, like being on layer 2 means you depend on the security of the layer 2 plus the security on layer 1. That's sort of like what layers means. Like it's a layered security. So whenever you are like whenever you are in any layer, you're depending on the security of all the stack of pancakes that are underneath you.
Right.
And I think the way it's going to look, it's really depending on the use case, right? So I think the idea is going to happen is that you have a game, you onboard your users directly into the game. They don't even know what's happening. Like they never see Ether or DAI in layer 1, right? They're just going to get credit on that layer 2 on that game. They're going to play around with it, and they're going to they're going to be happy on it, and they're going to only realize that there is something to be done when they want to do something. Let's say they won a prize, and now they want to take that prize and do something outside the scope of the game. Then that's when they're going to realize, oh, there was actually like something that happens there, right? So I think that's probably the UI, like that's probably the perfect UI in which you don't even realize there is a layer 2 or layer 1 or set-on layer when you're starting to play around until you become a pro user, right? Maybe if you're doing a game, like only people who win the game, only people who are making a lot of money from the game need to understand what's happening in there, right? Maybe only people who are doing crazy trades in which, oh, I'm actually buying planets here and selling and trading them for cows in this other game, and then doing an arbitrage with cards in this third game. That is the person that needs to understand all the layer pancakes, right? Otherwise, you're just like 99% of users are just playing around. Just a little bit like when a lot of users that buy crypto in Coinbase are just leaving their money on Coinbase. But with the difference here is that it's a little bit more secure because most layer 2s, you don't depend on a single person, right? It's going to be like that, except instead of putting your money on Coinbase, you're always leaving your money on that layer 2 until you want to move that. And that's how it works.
Yeah, I agree with you. The practicality of their chicken and the egg, though, because it's like the developers will not want to develop on a layer 2 unless they see that that's popular. But the popularity of a layer 2, like you described, generates from the demand of an app or a game. So it's like,
maybe everyone will have their own layer 2 like that. We don't know. Maybe they will start by generating their own layer 2 by deploying their own chain, and then that's how they do it, right? Maybe it's the other way around, right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've had that thought experiment as well, where we've talked about different app chains, and it's almost like in a similar like incremental decentralization. Maybe you start with the game and it has its own chain, as long as there's an exit. So from like a user perspective, what you're trying to do is you start you know, in the original concept of like a smart contract wallet, it's like somewhat custody because you have a guardian, and then you have the situation where you can exit, you know, that and have self-sovereignty and remove that guardian. We also see this pattern emerging right now with DAOs, right? So you see a lot of these like food tokens. What they do is they have a token and then they have a multi-sig. And then from the multi-sig, then they add voting components and upgrade to a DAO. What we're seeing here, and what I think you're describing, is similar pattern that I don't know if it's right or wrong, but you have your own chain. And when you have your own chain, then like it's almost kind of like almost centralized to maybe whatever that whatever proof of authority, whatever kind of consensus mechanism you have. Once that becomes popular, as long as there's an exit back
That's
into
true.
mainnet, that you can actually like, you know, so it's not so much that you start out decentralized, but you have always an exit to something else.
Yeah. I will have to leave soon, so I want to leave with a few ideas. There is one problem though with that chain concept. I think the fear is at some point at some point having a side chain or a dApp chain might be very, very similar to just using a completely different blockchain altogether, right? That might be something that happens, in which we realize that the real layer 2 is the third biggest cryptocurrency or the fourth biggest cryptocurrency, and that's really like where all the layer 2s are happening. Just like Ethereum is becoming a layer 2 of Bitcoin, like maybe some other big cryptocurrency will become the layer 2 of Ethereum, right? And then we all realize that it's always has been like an ecosystem of cryptos, and you're just like trading them in like as long as you can jump from one to the other in a secure manner.
Yeah, that might be it. Maybe there's, who knows? So that's kind of an existential question, right? Maybe like social networks, you know, but this time it could be tiered and tied where, you know, I wish that like if I had my Friendster connections, I can move all of them and port them to MySpace. And then once I grew that, I can move MySpace to Facebook. And then all my Facebook friends, I have control of my own graph that I could move over to TikTok. And then now TikTok is not a thing. I can move it to the next thing, right? As long as I had that sovereignty.
Oh, we could talk hours just on social media interoperability. I think that's a huge, another like big thing we can. That's a big subject. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to respect your time. Thank you so much for chatting. I feel like this was like a
Thank
podcast,
you too.
but this is more of a interview.
Oh, actually, James, since you are recording, like I don't think we talked about anything that was sensitive. If you want to publish it somewhere, like a podcast or
Epic.
anywhere you want, feel free
Yeah,
to do it.
I think we might as well.
I actually think it would be fun.
Yeah, perfect.
Great.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I think it was a great conversation. I've just been literally listening the whole time. But I think letting you guys both hash these ideas out and talk has been really amazing and like rewarding. And I think like we really covered a lot of ground here. So started with like the issues with privacy on Ethereum and an open financial system, and then getting into obviously the challenges of universal logins and like contract-based account management. And then like going into layer 2, because it all really circles around the user experience. And that's really what universal logins was originally built for, is this next level user experience within Ethereum that just doesn't exist with private keys, because private keys, I mean, they scare people away. That's like ultimately what happens, right? You see like 99% of people are leaving or don't download MetaMask when prompted to, essentially, despite wanting to interact with an application. So no, I think this is like super rewarding, and yeah, I might as well just like throw it on YouTube, and we can share it around, just get the ideas and thoughts out there.
And then we'll talk about social networking platforms. I think think we can have a great conversation in the future about that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Episode 2 of our podcast.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned.
Awesome.
Great.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
Alex.
James and Alexis. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Bye.
Right.